Oh no, I can't let it slide. Welcome to New Mexico Black Rifle Operators Union. I'm your host, Sean. So, they released the body camera footage from the shooting on April 5th, where Farmington PD responded, and looks like now they executed a homeowner. The video is graphic, and I'm not a big fan of war porn or any of that type of stuff, but I watched it just to see what happened. And it looks to me that, being a third-party observer and not an expert of what law enforcement has to do, it looks like they were too quick on the trigger. This doesn't look like a good shoot, as if you watched enough of things like Donut Operator, where he goes through the whole scenario of what they had to do to actually use force. And when I say this, the first thing they do is they knock on the door, and for law enforcement officers who have the state's monopoly on violence and has the state backing them, you think they would have a little more confidence knocking and pounding on a door and announcing who the hell they are. That doesn't seem the case. The next thing that's really blatantly obvious is that they actually talk about responding to the wrong address, that this is the wrong address. Yet they continue. So it doesn't look like they staged, so there was no real leadership up to that point other than their training officers and the chief and how they've been trained. But there's also another incidence of them responding to the wrong address a couple years ago, and this is filed by someone who is kind of known in the area because he owns pretty much a city block, and he runs two of the craft beer places in town. One is Three Rivers and one is Lauderhouse. Well, this gentleman that I'm talking about owns Three Rivers, and he put out a letter, and he posted it on Facebook so everybody could see it, about being a concerned citizen and saying, hey, look, this happened a couple years ago. You said that you were going to train your officers and fix this type of issue so that they don't respond to the wrong address. Well, fast forward a couple years, doesn't look like they did that. It also looks like these officers were never trained on the law. Let me explain why I'm saying that. The homeowner that was executed, he never did anything wrong. They responded to the wrong address. There was no crime committed here by the homeowner. The only crime committed, in my opinion, and I stand behind this, was the murder of this gentleman who answered the door. And you can see in the video that they very meekly knock and announce, so I could see myself being in this scenario. I'm not a sound sleeper. Maybe this guy was. Him barely figuring out what the hell's going on because it's 11:30 on a Wednesday night and he's got to go to work in the morning. So he's probably already in bed, his family's already in bed, and someone's knocking on his door. Now, I'm not saying pounding because they didn't really pound. They knocked on the door 3 times, made the announcement very meekly, saying this is Farmington PD, and then he comes to the door after a minute and some change and barely goes to open the screen door, and he shot. Now, at a point in this, one of the officer's cameras, you can see the guy raising his arm, and he does have a gun in his hand. Now, at that point, was it that he was thinking of this as a defensive situation? That he's now defending his home? He's not able to see exactly what's going on because there's bright lights in his face. So, if you think about this tactically from just your average person, if you can't see what's going on, and these people, you're not even sure what's going on, and you're trying to protect your kids and your wife, I definitely can see this. I've responded. You can ask my kids' friends that have shown up late at night. You pound on my door late at night, I'm going to respond with a gun. Now, I don't know that I would have opened the door with a gun in hand, had I had heard it was Farmington PD. I know I probably would have found a way to look outside. I probably would have used my webcam that I have outside so that I could see what was there before I did anything further. But there's a point to this that seconds count here. He didn't know, and he just responded because he's worried about his family. So I think it's sad that this happened, number one, but it's also horrible in the timing of what they're doing on the stories, telling the story. And when I say this, I've done the PR stuff before for a school district, and you're supposed to be one of those people that tells your story so other people don't tell your story. Well, they know they're in the wrong here because they keep dropping this story on Friday after everybody's going out. Think about it. What's the best time to drop a story and have nobody read it or nobody see it? You drop it on a Friday when the news is kind of slow in the evening because everybody's decided they've had a long week. They're going to go out and do stuff. I mean, myself included. I didn't see the footage until I got home because I'd had some... I went out and had a steak with a buddy, and that's my one time going out every Friday is I go out every Friday. I make myself do that so that I'm, trying to be human and reconnect with people, although I just go to the same place usually. I'm a creature of habit, I guess. But it's horrible to think that everybody went out Friday night and they dropped this story so that nobody would see it. You're seeing even hardcore people in the area that are really conservative guys and women who normally would be all about backing the blue, coming out and saying this is wrong. And my problem with this is that the state has a monopoly on violence. And when I say the state, I mean the government. There should never be a place in time that our government sees us as the enemy. And we're seeing this more and more in the cultural war on the political stage in the federal government. And I had hoped that, at the state level and the city level, we weren't getting to that point. But it's looking very clearly now that we absolutely are at that point. We absolutely are at the point where law enforcement sees us as the enemy. And that's not what they're hired to do. We also... I would raise the question of what kind of training are we giving our officers if this is the response that they're getting? If all they're getting is tactical training and they're not getting the response, the training to respond to the mentally ill, or they're not getting the response to deal with normal day-to-day situations and their first action is always to go towards the gun, then they're probably in the wrong line of work. They should be a soldier if they're going to do that type of thing. Soldiers neutralize targets. That's probably why a lot of people, myself included, aren't law enforcement agents. I've always held law enforcement as one of those careers I would have loved to have gotten into when I was younger and sprier. But I know for a fact that I don't have the right mental attitude, or at least I didn't think I did. Because that's probably what would have been my first response, is to neutralize a target. And that's when you see things in those black and white scenarios all the time, and you don't see that person as a human, that's where you have problems. And that's why I know I have the temperament and mentality to know that I'm not cut out for law enforcement. Because I don't want to be the person that has to live with it the rest of my life, knowing I killed an innocent person. And that's exactly what these officers did. One, they know the body camera footage shows you that these guys knew they were at the wrong damn address. And if all we're doing in the state of New Mexico, in the city of Farmington, is training officers on SRT or SWAT type tactics, and we're not training them the people aspect of the job, then we need to reevaluate our training regime. And that starts with the chief, and it goes down from there. And there's no way that you can sit there and say, since there's been multiple incidences now where Farmington PD has responded to the wrong address within 2 houses, within 2 shops, in 2 different times, that this is a known problem and they're not addressing it. I personally believe that these officers probably should go to jail at the very minimum for murder, because they didn't do this right. There's absolutely no way you can look at the footage we saw and their quick pick to just go straight to the gun and not use other technology to get the word out that they are there. You know, I know for a fact that our cruisers can announce from their speaker that's on the car that officers are there. There's no way that they should have not used something like that, or escalated it up and sent a text out to everyone there, or called everyone in that area, because they have that technology too, to let them know what the hell's going on. And instead, you have 3 cops, that's what it shows in the camera footage, and all 3 shot, and they killed an innocent man. And when you say that, or when I say that, I mean that. He's responded as any homeowner in the Southwest, rural Southwest, probably would. At 11:30 at night on a Wednesday, someone knocks on your door. Now, the way Farmington PD is putting this out is that they pounded on the door and they announced themselves. The camera footage itself shows that they knock 3 times very meekly, and very meekly announce who the hell they are. Now, my bedroom is in the back part of my house. I imagine his is pretty much the same way, because most master bedrooms are. How the hell are you supposed to hear Farmington PD when you barely announce it from that back part of where you live, where you're staying, where you're asleep, where you're just waking up to try to go deal with this? As a concerned citizen, I would recommend that all of you have some sort of camera foot that you can, like a ring or something that you can put on your door so that you can see what's out front, so that this doesn't happen to you. Because there is no guarantee anymore that the state won't perpetrate violence on you just for existing. We're now 100% the enemy. And as weird as this is going to sound, I actually advocate for having more arms and more armed people in society, because it adds that fear. They need to be afraid of us, but they also need to be knowing that they're there to protect us. They need to be afraid of us knowing that if they do this type of thing consistently, that there are actions and repercussions for it, is what I mean. And that's where we're at in today's society. You know, if you look at what's happened with this, and you look at the culture war breaking into, political theater at the national stage and on the national political stage, I was hoping, beyond hope, unreasonably I think now, that those culture war issues wouldn't infiltrate my town. My town has up to this point been pretty reasonable about these stupid culture war issue things. Trans stuff here, not a thing. No one cares. You want to do that? No one cares unless you're a minor. And when we say minor, we mean kid. If a kid's doing this, we need to talk, because there's probably other mental issues. And if you look at society right now, where we have people willing to throw themselves on the middle of the street and whine and cry because they see that as a point of contention or a way to protest, we have to ask ourselves, where did we go wrong? As a Gen Xer, I think that this is our kids that we're seeing. And the very babies of the millennials, or not millennials, the boomers. The ones that were our little brothers and sisters. These spoiled little brats think they can just get whatever the hell they want because they've been told their entire life that they are God's gift. They're not. When I say God's gift, they're not the only gift that God gave. So the world does not revolve around us. And living where I have lived and knowing that it we have a small population, but our town is huge geographically, that our response times are going to lag. I've always been on the, self-ownership bandwagon of I'll defend myself until help arrives. Well, now I don't know that I want help to arrive, because if help arrives and the first thing they do is see me and everything around me as the wrong person or the enemy, why would I want them to respond to anything, period? I mean, we have some serious questions and soul-searching that Farmington PD needs to do and look at this and say, so what did we do wrong here, and how do we rectify our image in the city? Because if you look at this right now, this looks like the way the story is dropped is their memory holding it, and they're trying to kill it because they know they screwed up. There's even conspiracy going around right now that 2 other people that were killed earlier the day that this happened, who somehow were working at the place where Mr. Dotson used to work, were killed, that there's some sort of connection here. Well, if there is some sort of connection there, we have another thing to worry about, because that means that the cops were corrupt enough that they killed 2 other people, somehow magically found a way to respond to the wrong address, and somehow magically killed the other person. Now, there's I think it's called Occam's razor. The simplest solution is probably what really happened. And to me, this all reeks of coincidental incident. And why I say that. You'd have to go through a lot of hoops to think that Farmington PD was able to kill 2 people earlier in the day, somehow, some way, someone on PD or someone they knew in PD, and then found a way to make a call for service for domestic violence and have the PD respond to the exact wrong address and then kill this person. There's too many assumptions that they could do this. Let's be honest. The state is completely incompetent. That's why we're talking about this right now. Anyone thinking that the state is actually competent enough to pull off a plan this grandiose at this city level, could they? Absolutely. Is it likely? Probably not. And the reason why it's probably not is because there's too many things they'd have to get exactly right to end up where we're at. And I don't believe the state is that good at doing that. They bumble into the stuff they do. I mean, look at what happened this last week where they had an intelligence leak. You can't tell me the 21-year-old kid had access to that level of clearance stuff for them to leak what they did. If you don't know what I'm talking about, look it up. Supposedly a 21-year-old Air National Guardman leaked all kinds of intelligence about what is happening in Ukraine right now. Now, from what I understand about a SCIF or a secure location, you cannot just willy-nilly access data like this. You have to know exactly where it is and how to access it, how to log in. So our federal government knew who this was pretty early on. And the Russians right now, for the most part, have said this was a psyop until recently. And that's because it shows that the Russians are actually winning in Ukraine. And that instead of 200,000 casualties, they're closer to 20,000 casualties. And if that is the real assessment, then that war in Ukraine is, while it's grinding, and the Russians are showing absolutely that they can't prosecute a war, means the Russians are going to win, and that we're wasting money there. In that intelligence drop, they also talked about Zelensky embezzling $400 million from all the billions we've sent over there. So my question as an American citizen on that front is, why are we continuing that? It also was leaked in those same document drops that we have 100 special forces on the ground, American special forces on the ground in Ukraine. Now, anyone has known anything about that war and the amount of weapons and hardware we've sent, that shouldn't surprise you that we have special forces on the ground. But we weren't the only country that was exposed in that document drop that showed that there are multiple special forces on the ground. That means we're directly engaged in combat with the Russians when we've been told we're not. And that was dropped yesterday also. That they had got that guy, and this is just, that was the end of it. You can't tell me a 21-year-old wasn't set up somehow, some way. And yes, I just talked about how conspiracies probably aren't the quickest, easiest answer. But there doesn't seem to be a point that a 21-year-old Air National Guardman would have access to the data that he was putting out. And for it to be legitimate means that someone either fed it to him or gave him access to this stuff and didn't vet him as an individual. So we have a rot nationally and now locally. There is no one coming to save you. Save yourself. It's all called self-ownership. Like, share, subscribe, be great.